Well, hello everybody. How's it going? So in today's video, this is to give you a little background info on the reading assignment that you're going to have for today, which I'm hoping will lead to us having some type of debate, a virtual debate. I'm hoping that that will happen in the next couple weeks. I want to see how this goes, but this is to give you the background info that you need. So, well, welcome to the little video hour I've got here. You don't have to take any notes because most of this is just review over what you notes that you've taken before spring break. It's just been a long time since then, so I wanted to review a few things and a few key definitions. If you remember, we were still on the judicial branch of the United States. So we were focusing in on ways to interpret the Constitution, constitutional interpretation. And it's like glasses or sunglasses. You could have different types of glasses, and those different glasses help you see in different ways. So the textbook had three different ways to interpret the Constitution. One was originalism, the other was living Constitution, and the third one was the plain meaning of the text idea. That third one, the plain meaning of the text, I'm not going to discuss for this, for the purposes of this. We're just going to kind of set to the side. We're going to ignore that interpretation of the Constitution. Instead, what we're going to focus in on is originalism and living Constitution. Let's start with originalism first. Okay, so originalism right here. Okay, so originalism, according to the textbook definition, is the idea that you interpret the Constitution as how it was made, as the founders and the framers of the Constitution made it. So if you're a judge, what you lean on is not the 200 years of history after, but what you lean on is all of the documents and all the writings of the founders themselves. Meaning, let's see here, not the complete works of Shakespeare, but this one. A book like this, The Founders' Constitution, with all of the documents and all the writings of the founders leading up to and after the Constitution, including the Federalist Papers. Those would be the documents that you look up the most. And again, there's advantages to this because we have a good idea of what the framers thought, what the founders thought. They explained it pretty well in the Federalist Papers and in other writings. And it gives you a foundation. It gives you a strong foundation to lean on. Okay, so one thing I want to point out is this idea leads to this: judicial restraint. Now, judicial restraint means, this is the key word here, right here, is precedence. Is that judges restrain themselves and they defer to precedent, meaning past cases. And again, they defer back to what the writings of the framers and the founders. So what judicial restraint really means is that judges aren't going to try to upset anything or legislate from the bench. What they're going to try to do is to stick with the strict interpretation of the Constitution, and not going to use judicial activism or judicial review for that matter. So that's judicial restraint. And who's going to use this? Mostly today, that aligns with conservative judges, aka Republicans. What you're going to read today is an instance or an excerpt from a speech by Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who recently, within the last couple of years, passed away. Scalia was on the court for almost 20 years, and he was a big proponent of originalism and had really, really good explanation of why this is the best way to interpret the Constitution. Famously, Scalia said that he thinks, to him, he believes in a Constitution that's not living, but it's dead, which is kind of a fun thing to say. You know, he's saying it to be funny and shocking, but he's saying, I believe in a dead Constitution. His point being that the Constitution is not a living thing. It is a document. It is a legal document, and it is not something that changes over time. That's why we should stick with originalism. Okay, so that's originalism, and how that ties into judicial restraint and ties into conservative judges today. So the other side, let's talk about the living Constitution. So this living Constitution, the definition of the living Constitution, according to the textbook, is that you take into account not just what the framers and the founders wrote, but all of American history after that to 2020, today. So the idea being that the Constitution and the interpretation of the Constitution just changes over time because people read things differently. How we read the Constitution today is different than it was read 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago. And things have to change. Things have to adapt. It's this Darwinian idea that the Constitution has to evolve, and it evolves through adapting to the current situation. If it doesn't, if the Constitution fails to adapt according to this idea, then it doesn't work anymore. Because conditions today aren't the way that they were 200 years ago when the Constitution was made. So it has to adapt. Okay? So this usually goes along with the idea of judicial activism, where judges use judicial review. And a great example of that is the Miranda versus Arizona case. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that law enforcement officers have to read your Miranda rights or any rights to you when they arrest you. However, that was interpreted by judges in the Miranda case, saying that it's implied by the Fifth Amendment. They read it as such that the Fifth Amendment gives you the right to due process and the right to keep you from self-incrimination, the right to remain silent. And that is a right that you need to be told of when you're arrested. So cops now, because of that case, they have to read you your Miranda rights. Example of judicial activism. And this usually sticks with liberal judges, aka Democrats. And the reading excerpt I got from you is for today is from Supreme Court Justice William Brennan, who also passed away about 10 years ago. And he was a really good proponent and had a really good explanation of the living Constitution and why the living Constitution is the best way to interpret the Constitution today. Okay, so what I'm hoping you guys see is not only are these clear definitions and clear sides, but they're also battle lines for the judicial branch today. How there's really two different sides and two different types of justices or judges. There are conservative judges and liberal judges, which is fascinating because people on the Supreme Court aren't supposed to pick sides. That's why they wear black, right? Because they're supposed to be neutral. They're not supposed to be one or the other. They are not supposed to be political. But you can't take the politics out. You can tell who on the Supreme Court is liberal, and who's not conservative by which president chose that judge to be a justice. So if it was Obama, for instance, or Bill Clinton, then they're liberal. If it was any of the Bushes or President Trump, who's already gotten to pick two, they tend to be conservative, and they tend to follow those clearly defined ideas of either originalism or living Constitution. And again, these are the dividing lines today that are splitting the judicial branch apart. The judicial branch has become much more polarized or politicized. It used to be in the past that when judges were nominated by a president, the Senate would basically just give their thumbs up, say, yeah, okay, good. They would defer to the president. For the last 20 or so years, that has not been the case. There's been intense fights in the Senate over who gets to be a judge because of these things, because we know that if it's a liberal judge, they're going to tend to go with the living Constitution idea, which is something conservatives just cannot fathom, and they will not accept that, and vice versa. So this gives you the battle lines for the judicial branch as well, and for the fight in Congress, the fight in the Senate to approve those judges, and how a president chooses which judges that they want for the Supreme Court. So for your assignment then is you're going to read an excerpt from both of these, answer the reading questions, and I hope that this will lead into the debate we can have between which is the best way to interpret the Constitution.